Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life, a series highlighting the cultural and social interactions with the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Area Interreligious Ministries in cooperation with KNVA. Join us now for Austin Faith Dialogue.
Welcome to Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Carl Gronberg, host of the program, and this is the Sunday before the 4th of July, Independence Day. And as we think about our freedoms and as we think about our population and the celebration, I'd like to introduce you to some people that you wouldn't meet. Their faces are going to come up on the screen, and you're going to meet them during this Austin Faith Dialogue program, because they are women of the world, women from Iraq. And these women bring to us their story in the presence of their lives of faith, for they are women of faith. And to help us with this is Peggy Kelsey. Welcome. Good to have you here.
Very good to be here.
Met you at a meeting and said, I have to ask that lady to be on Austin Faith Dialogue. So we're so glad that you're here. You have an interesting story to tell all of us who watch Austin Faith Dialogue. You were in college and something happened to you that wasn't necessarily a bolt of lightning, but you were invited to do something.
I was invited to go to Iran as a foreign exchange student, which I did.
And as a college student from Ohio, Kent State, is that right?
Kent State, yes.
And it did something for you to go there as a college student.
Right. I'd never been out of the country. I came from a fairly restricted background. And so I went to Iran. It was during the Shah, so it was the time before the revolution, and it was very pro-Western at that time. And got introduced to a whole other way of life, other way of thinking, other way of looking at the world.
And then you met your husband, and he said, let's travel the world, right?
He did, and we did. We spent 3 years in all traveling around the world, overland through Southeast Asia and then to the Middle East. And we spent 2 years in the Middle East working in Bahrain and Yemen and Jordan.
Amazing. When you told me that, I was just really overwhelmed, because then you decided to move to Austin, Texas.
Well, yes. Where else can you go after a trip like that?
And you came to Austin, Texas, raised your children here.
Yes.
And then decided in 2003 to accept the opportunity to go and meet the women of Afghanistan.
Yes. I was actually at a reception for 14 Afghan women who were passing through Austin. And when I met these women, they were so lively. They were feisty. They were people that were like you or like me, just normal people. And it was striking because in 2002, when I met them, it was very different than their image in the media, which always showed them as these poor, helpless victims who can't do anything for themselves. And it's not that that wasn't true, but it's that each one of those women had a lot more that was very true and significant about her.
And maybe in this culture, through the news and other means, we only see one dimension of these women in Afghanistan, and later in the program we meet these women of Iraq, because they are multifaceted. They're intelligent, they're creative, they're women of faith. And Peggy, from my point of view, looking at the pictures that our viewing audience will see, these are beautiful people. Yes. And the women of Afghanistan, I would imagine the same way. What about this experience? How did you get to go to see the women of Afghanistan?
Well, I put together a project that I called the Afghan Women's Project. It was funded by AirServe, which is an NGO, an aid organization, international aid organization that flies aid workers to their project sites. And my husband had worked for them. They were familiar with me, and so I approached them and offered to photograph their operation in exchange for them flying me over there, because I'm a professional photographer as well.
And they're going to see these pictures and they'll realize what an excellent photographer you are. I'm wondering also, as we look, some of these pictures have come up of these women of Iraq, and as we just go through them, we want to talk about them later in the program. But right now I just wanted our viewing audience, so if we could just pull up the different pictures of these beautiful young women that you took pictures of when you were in Iraq.
And interviewed, yes.
And interviewed also. And as we continue to roll these, you will have stories, because they are such beautiful women of faith, and they shared their faith with you, and they shared their vision of life. But they are refugee women, and they are women who no longer are in their homes in Iraq.
Right.
In Afghanistan, and when you were there in 2003, and this is one of the ladies we're going to meet a little bit later on, as she is of the Christian community, is that correct?
That's right, Chaldean Christian.
And we'll talk a little bit more about her. But let's talk about the experience in Afghanistan, then we'll come back and we can tell the stories of these women from Iraq. And the people, were they hopeful in 2003? The Taliban was gone. What did you experience?
It was a year and a half after the Taliban had left, and there was a lot of projects going on, and people were very hopeful. And I would go out, do my interviews, and I would come back and I would think, wow, there's a lot of hope, because you have a population that's thirsty for education. You have a lot of Afghans who were coming back to Afghanistan to help rebuild their country. You had schools being built. You had infrastructure being rebuilt, and lots of aid organizations to help people, and organizations to help the different ethnic groups get along again like they used to before the wars. I would see all of that. I would be feeling great about their prospects. I would come home, turn on CNN, and watch, oh, there was a bombing over here, Taliban are resurging over there, and it just was hard, you know, and you don't know which way it's going to go. Of course, now it's several years later, and it's not going in a good way. And people are not so hopeful anymore, and they're really very, very frightened.
The women of Afghanistan, when you were there, and you had an opportunity to visit with them as well as to take pictures of them, what did they share with you in terms of their hopes, their aspirations, their dreams, the idea of democracy, the idea of freedom and opportunity? Did they express any of that?
There was some, but more people care about their own personal lives. You know, they want to have a life where their kids can be educated, where they have enough food to put on the table, where they can get a job. Those issues were more front and center for them, as well as for the Iraqi refugees. I mean, really for everybody, those are your core issues. Yes, they wanted democracy. Yes, they wanted representative government. A lot of women wanted to work outside the home, but not all of them did, you know. Some of them had large families, and they saw their job as taking care of their kids.
Indeed, they worked right there,
Yeah.
I'm wondering also about their attitude towards the presence of the U.S. Forces.
I asked them about that because in order to liberate liberate them from the Taliban, a lot of people were killed. A lot of Afghans were killed, and so I asked them about that, and they said, "Oh no, you're going to go away. You're not here to stay. You're just helping us now. So please stay and continue to help. We hope you don't abandon us like you did after the Soviets left, which led to their civil war." That was a big fear that they had, that we would pull out too early, and that we would divert all of our resources that we'd sent to Afghanistan, that we would get diverted to Iraq, which is in fact what happened.
What they were hoping then is that these women of Afghanistan were hoping that they could have a life, that their children could be educated, that they could have the basic necessities of life.
Yes, and they wanted peace. Those women had been living under war for 23 years at that time. It's been 26 years now.
Did they ever talk about faith? Did they ever talk about the presence of God in their lives?
Oh, yes, because I asked them, I wanted to get, what kept you going? How did you get up? When you're imprisoned under house arrest, basically, by the Taliban, how could you get up in the morning, And it was because of God. They everyone, it's like, God helps me through this.
Wow.
It's through God that I'm able to do it. And it's so interesting because here in the West, we see Islam as this militant religion and all these jihadists and everything. And for these women, God is a nurturing, loving being. And the whole religion of Islam is, it's helpful to women.
Yep.
And it improves women's situation. It gives women guarantees of their rights, which the other religions don't have. It's society that grants it in Christian areas. But under Islam, women's rights are mandated in the religion. And so they really believed in Islam very strongly.
Peggy, in all your travels, you told me a story, and I'm trying to remember now where that story, about the man who really touched you. God, where were you?
Yes.
Were you and your husband traveling then, or was that in Afghanistan?
No, this was when I was first traveling abroad, and I had been raised in the United States in, like I said, a very monolithic culture and everything.
In a Christian home.
Christian home, and went to church every Sunday, the whole bit. And here I go off to Iran, a Muslim country, and I'm out in a little village with one of my professors, and there's a man with a tiny, tiny little store. I mean, most Americans have bathrooms bigger than this store, with about 5 or 6 different items on the shelves. They were bare otherwise. And the professor asks this man, he says, how do you survive? You know, here you are, you don't even have enough to sell. Even if people bought all of this, it's not enough to survive on. How do you survive? And he just says, by the grace of God.
Yeah, I thought it was a great story.
And it was the first time that I had seen, I mean, I looked at this man and I saw that that was sincere. From all the times I'd been to church, people believed in God and they were sincere, but not like their life depended on it, which was the case with this man. And it was at that point that I had to open myself to see that, you know, God is bigger than religion, is what I would say.
Yeah, when you told me that story, I think that was one of those defining moments for you and your spiritual journey, that here was this man far from all that you'd experienced in your growing up, and yet he was saying something that really resonated with you, that meant something to you, that God will provide, that God will care for me, and he trusted in all of that. He was not of your faith community necessarily, and yet he spoke the faith to you. And I think that's freedom. And on this Sunday before the 4th of July, it would seem to me that it would be well for our culture to celebrate that kind of freedom, that the God we know and the God we worship is a God who gives people freedom to experience God in a variety of ways. And that man certainly spoke to you.
Yes, he did.
Well, now looking back on the experience in Afghanistan, and things are different from 2003, you're hopeful, or are you wondering?
I wish I could say I was hopeful. It just, right now, honestly, it looks kind of bleak to me. And I think that doesn't mean that we should give up hope. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't continue to donate to organizations who help Afghanistan, because if you can help with education, that education will serve
and
women
that's
and
needed
people.
In Afghanistan
Oh,
very
yes,
much, isn't
yes.
it? Yeah.
And it will help them even if things turn, if the Taliban returns, or if the present government that is also very fundamentalist and very repressive comes, takes over more and women lose their rights again. Whatever you can give them now will certainly help them in the future.
Your organization is about women in the world and about speaking. Where does that come from? Where does this organization? You gave birth to this organization, is that right?
I did. And it's partly in response to an article that I read by Susan Fiske, who is a psychologist from Harvard University. And she did a study where she did functional MRIs on people, and she put probes on their, I forget, prefrontal cortex. Anyway, it's the center of emotional significance in human beings. In this study, they showed pictures of kids and of loved ones and people, and these particular areas of the brain fired up, and they got a regular, normal human response. They showed pictures of drug addicts shooting up and of homeless people, and those areas of the brain did not fire at all. So what that means is that people did not really see them as people. Then, as a further step in her experiment, she asked each of these people while they were wired up, what do you think that drug addict, what do you think is his favorite vegetable? And by thinking of that question, it forces you to think of the person as a human being, and those centers of the brain lit up again. And that's what I choose to do, because we look at the news and we hear about Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's really depressing, it's scary. We have our sons and our husbands who are over there fighting, and they're fighting an enemy over there. And yet there's all of these people who are the unintended consequences, the collateral damage of these wars that we fight. And without putting a name on them, without putting a face, and without hearing their stories, they become more statistics. And when you
numbers.
Numbers. When you say there's 1 million refugees in Jordan, that's just 1 million. You can't really think of it.
Well, let's see if we can get the viewing audience to fire up, okay? If we can touch them, all right?
Okay.
Because we're going to go back and look at some of these pictures, and we'd like to bring the pictures back up on the screen so you can see them. And you in the viewing audience of Austin Faith Dialogue, as you look at these women, at these people, I'm hoping you'll see them on this Sunday before 4th of July, when we celebrate our nation, our freedoms, our citizenship, that we'll see these people as human beings. Peggy, who is this?
This is Zahra, and she was my translator while I was there. She was raised in what I would call a large family in Iraq. She was like the second to last child out of about 7. And she had a hard time in her family, and the person that she really bonded with was her father. But he was taken away by Saddam Hussein's men when she was 11, so that was very hard for her. But she had a thirst for learning and a real drive to learn English, which she did by making friends with a neighbor who was an English woman, and she got lessons from her, and she did very well in school. And anyway, after her father died, her family had a lot of economic difficulty. And one day she returned home from college, and there was a strange man in her living room. And her mother says, "Oh yes, this is your new husband."
Oh yeah, arranged
And
marriage.
so it was an arranged marriage. She'd never met the man before, and she was forced to marry him. After she ended up having to support him because he came from a very disadvantaged family, a dysfunctional family, so he really wasn't able to hold down a job. She worked for a Russian NGO, a Russian aid organization, and began to be targeted. And so the organization sent her to Russia so that she could hopefully get a visa to Germany. So she spent 6 months there, didn't get the visa, and after a while ended up coming to Jordan.
Okay. And that's where she is now. She's
And that's
in
where
Jordan.
she is now with her 2 daughters.
Well, amazing story of a woman who has had all kinds of experiences
And this
in her
woman,
life.
because of her difficult times, I think she has been called to help people. And so she gets money from foreigners and distributes it among very needy Iraqi families that she's in contact
A
with.
social worker. Let's find another. Oh, this one, she's cute, huh?
Rawa is 16 years old, and her faith is Sabaean, which I'd never heard of before. It's a pre-Moses religion. And the thing that is concerning her right now, I mean, let me just say that her number one desire right now is to be educated, to finish school. She's got just a couple of years left till she finishes high school.
And do I understand right, in Iraq, she had free education, is that correct?
Free education up until up through whatever university degree you want to get. So, and now in Jordan, they're not allowed to go to school. Some of them can, depending on the headmistress or the headmaster of the school, but she is not able to go to school. So it's really sad.
16 years old.
16, yes.
Well, let's go to our next one.
Isra is a Sunni Muslim, and her father worked for Saddam. And they lived a very nice life. They had, unlike the Shiites who were under Saddam, who were persecuted a lot of the time, the Sunnis actually had a quite good existence. And because her father worked for Saddam and in the oil companies, they had a quite good economic life. And so they left because of the war and because the Shiites were taking over and were threatening them. But they're living in Jordan, and really they have a decent economic life.
And her life looks like she's pretty comfortable.
Yes,
and
it
living
is.
in Jordan. But she's another refugee who has left her home.
She's a refugee, right.
Yeah. Let's see who's next.
Mubr. And I met this woman, and I just immediately kind of fell in love with her. You know, sometimes there's just a connection with somebody, and she's 61 years old. And I asked if I could interview her, and she said, okay, but no pictures. And the reason is because her son was a translator for the U.S. forces, and he began to get threats, and really serious death threats. So they all left Iraq and came to Jordan. But she's really afraid that if her picture is taken, because really she doesn't know me, we liked each other, but you know, it could even be inadvertent that her picture might be broadcast somewhere. And so she just let me photograph her hands.
And I think
that's really underscores, though, the uncertainty of their situation in Jordan and the uncertainty of their life, because there are people who can still come after them.
And all these women have that type of reality in their lives. They're all women who have been displaced by the war, and they're all women whose hands, as this woman's hands, have done a lot of work. But they're all women also who've had to say, we leave behind, and we don't know where the future will be.
Exactly.
What do you think you have experienced out of being around these women? The Afghanistan women and the women of Iraq, what kind of things, Peggy, have you learned from them?
Well, one thing I'd like to point out is that there's a huge difference between Afghanistan and Iraq. Afghanistan had educated women in it, but there were also a lot of women who have not had the ability to go to school, and many, many, many women who are very, very oppressed, if not by the Taliban, by their own family and their own culture. Iraq was almost the opposite end of the scale, because with free education, and it was a very secular country, people were free to practice their own religions, but the government didn't make them practice one or the other. And so they really had an awful lot of freedom. Not compared to the West necessarily, but of the Arab countries and the places in the Middle East, the Iraqi women had a lot of strength and a lot of very feisty.
Yeah. But the war changed all that. The idea of coming and bringing democracy, the idea of coming and bringing, you know, a new way of life really changed. Now, we have on the screen another one of our women, and I really liked her, and I liked her face. I think you do a marvelous job with your pictures, your photographs. They seem to me, they touch whatever it is up here in my head, and I fire up when I look at them because I see their humanity. Well, tell us about her.
Nagia is a Chaldean Christian, and she went to school and studied store management, and she worked under Saddam in the education department, managing the stores of supplies that students got. She earned a good salary at the beginning. After sanctions, though, with all the inflation of the Iraqi dinar, and also people got paid a lot less, her salary ended up being about $2 a month when she quit and realized that she needed to do something else. She also left because of different threats that they got. I didn't meet anyone who left just because of economics or any other reason than they felt that their life was in danger, their cousin, their brothers, their sons had been kidnapped, and you know, stories like that.
Right.
She, her sister had abandoned her son when he was 2 to Nagia's care. And so Nagia and her father and the nephew came to Jordan and trying to get visas to come to the United States or wherever else they could go. Nagia actually got a visa to Canada, but refused to go because they wouldn't allow her nephew to go. He's 13, and it's really hard because he's not her actual son, and he's getting of the age, you know, where countries are less willing to take in boys as they get older. So
she could have gone to Canada.
She could have gone to Canada if she'd been willing to abandon the boy, but she didn't. And so she's there in Jordan. Her only hope is that maybe her father can get citizenship, and then maybe some relative can help her come over.
You know, one of the reasons I wanted these pictures to be up here on this Sunday before the 4th of July is because I think of these people had dreams, they had hopes, they had aspirations, and things have changed for them. And maybe the intentionality to bring democracy and freedom as we understood freedom had merit. But this is the fallout, this is the reality that these people now, these women have lost their homes, and now they are in Jordan, and they're living from hand to mouth and hoping someday to go back home to Iraq.
Some of them would like to go back home, but some of them have had such horrible things happen to them that and with memories that are so bad that they don't want to go back. They want to start a new life over somewhere else, anywhere else.
And that's so powerful of them. They want a new life.
Yes.
You know, this country is born in that idea of new life for the people who came here, the immigrants who came here. But there are restrictions in Jordan. They can't establish a new life there, can they?
No, it's very difficult for them. When they came over, the Iraqi refugees came in waves, and the ones who came earlier got welcomed in a better way. Now the ones who come get a 3-month tourist visa, which of course expires very, very quickly. And they're not allowed to work, kids aren't allowed to go to school. You cannot have an Iraqi school that will, you know, for Iraqis or anything that doesn't take anything from the government, that's not allowed either.
Because the government of Jordan doesn't really want them to be there.
Well, right, and they don't want to institutionalize aid. Another thing in the case of the schools is that they're afraid. You know, are they going to be madrasas like in Pakistan, you know, that foment political unrest or anything? So they're trying to keep it.
In closing, as we think about these women and what have that meant to you? What has it done for you as a woman, as a citizen of this country, as a person of faith, but also as a person with kind of an international flair to you and a photographer? What do these faces, these women, do for you?
Well, one of the things, especially coming back from Afghanistan, that I got was that I think they tell me that I can survive a lot more than I think I could survive. That's one thing. The other thing is that when I look at these Iraqi women, I get real passionate about it, and I want their situation to be better. And it's like I look at them and I feel very sorry. I want to help them. I want the Jordanian government to change their minds and to treat them better and to give them some opportunities. On the other hand, when you look at the Jordanian government and you look at the makeup of their population, 70% of the Jordanian population are Palestinians, refugees from 48, from 67, from the Lebanese Civil War, from the Kuwait War, and plus, more coming all the time.
Huge number.
Refugees, Palestinians from Iraq as well. And then you have 15% of the population in Iraq right now is Iraqi. 15% of the population in Jordan is Iraqi. So the Jordanian government, they're kind of caught. And the king, while he's a fairly progressive monarch, it's not a democracy, but they're very enlightened and they're very concerned about their population. He's kind of riding a tiger. And so I got this thing of being able to look at this and understand it, and look at this side and understand it, without having to make one wrong, without having to make one right, and without having to make it work for them together, because I don't know how that can work.
And no simple answer to it.
And there is no simple answer. There's no simple answer anywhere. And being able to be okay with that and still go forward with what I can do to change the world as much as I can. Whether it's a little tiny piece, it's a little piece in the quilt, it can still make a huge difference.
Peggy, if people want to see all of your pictures of the women of Iraq, how would they do that?
I don't know.
Maybe have you back on Austin Faith Dialogue?
You could have me back on Austin Faith Dialogue. I would say also that they will be at Ventana del Sol, which is a coffee house on Old Wharf. It's at Old Wharf in Burleson, and right now the Afghan Women's Project photographs are hanging there, and the Iraqi Women Projects will be there probably next week.
Okay, thank you. Really good to have you on Austin Faith Dialogue. You have such spirit, feistiness, and if they have feistiness, you do too. To all of us in the Austin Faith Dialogue community, we thank you for being with us, and we wish for you a blessed and joyous and happy 4th of July. But as you celebrate the freedoms that are part of our lives in this great nation of ours, remember these people around the world. Think of them, support them, find ways that we might be able to see their humanity, and as we see one another's humanity, to rejoice in the commonality that we have as people of God throughout all the world. Happy 4th of July. Thanks for being with us on Austin Faith Dialogue. Peace and blessings to you and to yours.